In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we have observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The Gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. Well, today our Christmas celebration comes to a close as we move into the season of Epiphany. Epiphany used to be one of the high festivals of the early church. Originally, Epiphany celebrated both Christ's birth and his baptism. There was no Christmas as we know it way back in the early days of the church. Up until the 4th century, January 6th was, for all purposes, Christmas. Then they moved the celebration of Christ's birth to what they thought was the winter solstice. On the solstice, the darkest day of the year, they chose to celebrate the coming of the light of Christ. The point was, even when the world was at its most bleak, the early Christians stood to proclaim hope. The light of God has come. The Feast of Epiphany is always January 6th, and it celebrates the coming of the light of God into the darkness of this world. And I don't think you need me to point out what is meant by that phrase, the darkness of this world. In a time of terrorism, never-ending war, racism, hatred, broken relationships, sickness, death, humanity is stumbling around in the dark. On Christmas Eve, we gathered in this place in worship to celebrate the coming of the Christ, the light who comes to illuminate the world. As we sat here in the still and the darkness, each of us holding a candle, we heard the opening words of John's Gospel. "In beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And all things came into being through him. And what has come into being in Jesus was life. And the life was the light of all people. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." The light of God has come into the world, and the darkness will not overcome it. That is the good news of Epiphany. It's in all of our lessons today. From Isaiah's bold, "Arise, shine, for your light has come," to Ephesians telling us that the light of Christ shines on all people, Jew and Gentile alike, right down to Matthew's Gospel telling us of wise men following starlight, noting that the light for all people has come. Throughout the season of Epiphany, you're going to hear that proclamation in lessons and hymns and sermons. Jesus Christ is the light of the world. Now, what does that mean? You got to ask, is the light coming into our darkness good news or bad news? Is it law or gospel? Well, as you might suspect in a Lutheran church, it's both. The light comes to both illuminate and expose. It's a scary thing to be left in the dark without light, as Pastor Russell and the children were talking about a couple Sundays ago. Without light, we cannot find our way. Without light, we can't even see our own situation. We could be sitting in a room full of danger and not know it. The light shines to illuminate our path, and that is good news. It's good news that brings comfort and hope. That's why a lot of us like a little nightlight in the room, you know? At the same time, light also exposes that which is hidden. It shines into the shadows, and that can be bad news for us. I've told the story before of when I was a little guy, I'd help my grandfather candling eggs. And if you don't know what that is, eggs pretty much look like eggs. But when you hold them up over, it was a candle back then in a box, when you hold them up over a candle and the light shines through, you can see the flaws, the cracks, any problems that are in there. The light exposes what's going on inside the egg. Well, the light of God is the same in that it illuminates and shares the goodness of glory of God. It comforts us, yet it also exposes the evil within us and around us. And it's that exposing aspect of the light that we may shrink away from, because it exposes our flaws, our brokenness. And we don't tend to like to have the wrongness that's inside of us exposed. But you know, we really need this exposing aspect of the light just as much as we need the comfort of a light in our darkness. The light comes and exposes our flaws so that we may be made new. It's a good thing to know and admit our brokenness, to recognize our shadow self. Because it's only then that our souls can join the psalmist in singing, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." Remember, God's judging work is part of God's redeeming work. So the light comes to us as both good news, a comfort, and bad news, exposing. And I guess you could say the message of Epiphany is good news that is bad news that is good news. Okay, maybe you wouldn't say it that way. But the light of Christ comes to us, and that is the good news. It exposes how we're not what He intended us to be, and that can sound like bad news. And it's also that we might be made new again and again and again. Because God's love for us, God's desire for us, to know life at its fullest, that passion in God never runs out. And that is truly good news. The prophet Isaiah proclaimed, "Arise, shine, for your light has come." For the people Isaiah is speaking to, the setting where they were hearing that was bleak. The people of Israel had been taken into exile in a foreign land. God said they had forgotten who they were as His chosen people, and they needed a new beginning. And it's while they are in exile in a foreign land, while they're questioning everything, who they were, what they were about, whether a God who could allow them to be taken from their homes was even real, it's into this atmosphere that Isaiah issues his stirring call. Arise, shine, for your light has come. The Lord will rise upon you, and the nations, all peoples, will be gathered to you. For a people without hope, standing in the rubble of their once proud nation, a small nation at that, this message was somewhat hard to believe. But Isaiah says it quite clearly. It will not happen because of your strength or your optimism or your greatness as a people. It will happen because God is here, God is present, and God is with you. He will be the shining light in the midst of the darkness. The story is all about His glory and power, and the people will rise again to be His hands, His servant people once again, because God is with them and because God is at work in the world. Isaiah tries to be very clear. They will not be the light, they will reflect the light of God. Like an alarm clock ringing out in the moments before dawn, the call goes out from God. Rise, shine, your moment is upon you. Now is the time to get up and walk as children of the light. I believe that same word of call, that same promise of a future filled with God's presence, comes to us this day as the people of Zion Lutheran. As we begin a new year in service to God and to others, we're reminded that the light of the world comes, and it is our place and our joy to reflect that light into the world around us. Next Sunday, I'm going to be saying a bit more about God's calling and our future as part of what He's up to in this world. But in the meantime, people of Zion, in the midst of a rapidly changing and growing community, in days of fear when we know not what each moment will bring, the call from God goes out to His people. Arise, shine, Christ is with us. Now is the moment to shine with the reflected light of His grace and His mercy and His love. Now is to reflect His passion for the poor and the hurting. Now is the time to share His invitation to come into His presence and be made new. Now is our moment to shine. And as we do, we always need to remember, it's not about us. It's all about what God has done and what God is doing and what God will do. Ours is to be a reflected glory, reflecting the light of Christ. Without a pattern in life of worship and study and service, it becomes way too easy for us to begin thinking of Jesus as just our little cosmic buddy who endorses our opinions and our thoughts and our actions. And before we realize it, we've constructed a God who reflects our light. And the focus is on us, not Jesus. Christian faith is the opposite of that. Christian faith in life is more about letting ourselves be immersed in that promised presence and letting the world see Him through us. Christianity, following Jesus, is life. It's an awakening to the reality of the presence of God in every moment. It's walking in the light of Christ day by day by day. When we are focusing on God's presence and what God is up to in the world, I think we can't help but be fulfilling our mission, both as individuals and as a congregation. And I suspect in those circumstances we will continue to be a healthy, growing congregation, although all of that is secondary. What is important is that this faith that we have, this church we've been made part of, is all about people seeing Jesus, the light who has come, into our world, into our lives. We have the chance to see that light and to experience His presence every time we come together in worship. We get a glimpse of that light whenever we immerse ourselves with our fellow people of faith in the study of His Word. And even more, we get to see the light of Christ in the face of others whenever we're involved in acts of service and kindness, especially for the ones God is so passionate about in Scripture: the poor, the powerless, the hungry, the hurting. The light of Christ has come and continues to come into our lives and into this world. May we let that light shine in us and through us, that this world might be made new. And to God be the glory. Amen.